Well, hello. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be the moderator of this panel. I'm Susan Lindner, and I'm the CEO of InNovation Storytellers. This panel is the best panel, obviously, because it's the one right before lunch. So I'm keeping you here hostage until the boxed lunches arrive. But never fear, you will be fed. I'm really excited to have with me this incredible group of women and talking about the ecosystem that supports women in innovation here and in the Nordics. So please allow me to introduce my illustrious panel today. Sitting beside me is Pia Billing-Bearfield. She is the president of the Swedish Women's Educational Association here in New York. And also Faye Penn. She's the executive director of Women NYC, a part of the New York Economic Development Corp. And also, last but never least, Frances Simowitz, who is the CEO of Weave Acceleration. Please welcome my panel with me today, if you wouldn't mind. A little round of applause for our group. Fantastic. I'm going to ask each of you just to introduce yourself with a single sentence to let us know a little bit more about what you do. Pia, will you start us off?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So I'm Pia and I'm Swedish of origin. As Susan said, I'm the president of Svea, we call it here in New York. And Svea is an organization that was founded in LA 1979 and has grown since then. So we are 6,000 members all over the world actually. And on the East Coast we have a regional part of it called OAME, where I am the vice president too. And the aim of the organization is to support the Swedish language, culture and tradition, and also support Swedish and Swedish-speaking women in different places. And in my situation, it's for women in New York. So we have a lot of different needs because we have members from 80 years old to 20, working, not working, all walks of life. So that's my job.
Hi Pia, thank you so much, Susan. How many people here speak Swedish, by the way? We're over-indexing on Swedish here. I'm impressed. My name is Faye Penn, and I work, as Susan said, at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and I have a dual role there. I am executive director of Women.NYC, which is an initiative designed to help women succeed in their businesses and careers. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart and my work at EDC. And I also am the executive vice president of the initiatives team, where we seed equitable growth in emerging and expanding industries. Those industries include life sciences, offshore wind, green tech, and clean tech. We have an evolving work stream around the childcare / family tech industry, which is very relevant to women in innovation, and a variety of other sectors. Thanks again for being here today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Frances Simowitz.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Frances. I'm the CEO of Weave Acceleration. Until recently, we were actually known as Numa New York, which was part of the Global Accelerator brand. I was one of the founders for the New York office, and then acquired the New York office, so we rebranded to Weave Acceleration. Our main mission is to support international entrepreneurs with US market entry through various accelerator programs. We actually, in Rise today, have 10 companies from Australia with us. We're running a program as we speak. And our team is entirely female-owned. The company is owned only by women, and all of our leadership is women. And until recently, because we just hired a male intern, we have one man.
For diversity.
For diversity.
Absolutely.
We needed a white man.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. Welcome, all of you. So I want to start off this conversation. We are coming off of, hopefully, the end of this COVID era, we hope. I feel like I'm saying it too soon. But one of the questions I wanted to ask each of you was, in this time of COVID and beyond, what does an ecosystem of support actually look like from your experience for women entrepreneurs right now? What do you think? And I'll start with you, Frances.
Yeah, I think, when the pandemic happened and we transitioned to virtual, I think one of the things that became evident was that it was more important than ever to have an ecosystem of support, and figuring out how to deliver that in a virtual format and still create those opportunities for connection. It was really hard in the pandemic. A lot of business owners were really unclear, especially in the beginning, of like where things were going, what are we doing, what's going to happen to our businesses. Like, it was a very scary, unsure moment. And so really making sure that the women that we work with and that all the entrepreneurs that we work with had support systems in place through our organization was even more important than ever as a result. And so delivering online programs, connecting, reaching out, one-on-one coffees, all of that in a virtual format became more important than ever.
Fantastic. What about you, Faye?
I love the question because we had a pilot program that was specifically designed to account for this issue, which was, if I'm going to tell a little story here if I could.
Please.
So one of the ways that Women.NYC figures out how to help women in New York City achieve equity on a variety of fronts is we would have salary negotiation workshops. And when we would go to our salary negotiation workshops, before COVID, we had a big effort around this. And we held them in various communities and various neighborhoods, libraries, and so forth, the whole 5 boroughs all over the city. And after every salary negotiation workshop, the women would line up like 3 or 4 deep to talk to me, to talk to my deputy director, to talk to the facilitator of the workshop. And they had so many different career questions. Some were entrepreneurs, some were students, some were early in their career, some were late in their career. Some of the questions we could answer, many we couldn't. They needed to talk to specialists. They needed to talk to folks who could answer those questions. And so we decided, and sort of the format of this didn't become clear until COVID, we've got a city full of people who can answer these questions. A lot of them are probably in this room. We've got a city full of extremely accomplished women who want to do more, want to give back, want to help other women get ahead. And a whole bunch of other women who want to talk to them. So we created a very simple, seemingly simple effort. It was called Digital Office Hours. And we invited 30 women, accomplished CEOs, founders, SVPs, EVPs, VPs, coaches. A lot of coaches signed up. Have office hours. Set aside some time to have conversations with people who want to meet you. And it was so successful, right? It wasn't your typical mentorship program that was, a year or 2 of embedding deeply with one person. It was just time. Set aside time to talk to other women, to help them lift up, help them work through things. And not only did 100% of participants say that they wanted to create more office hours, the advisors kept wanting to re-up. I mean, the pilot's over, and we're still getting emails from the advisors wanting to know when they can sign up for more office hours, because it's an incredibly transformational moment, like a half hour, a very intimate, personal conversation with an individual as a volunteering mechanism, as a way to give back, proved to be powerful for both sides. And at the end of it, our participants have networks they never had. One participant signed up for, two participants actually signed up for 10 sessions. She didn't have a network before this. Now she has a network of SVPs, CEOs, VPs, coaches, and that's the kind of thing that you can do in an environment like New York City and other cities around the world. You can create opportunities for fortuitous connections that between 2 people who would never have the chance to meet. And what comes out of those connections is incredibly powerful. We've had raises, we've had promotions, we've had, women saying they've changed their career direction, they look for a new job, just from a conversation, just from access to an expert who wants to give their time.
Fantastic. You raise an interesting point, though. Such a diversity of women with so many different needs. And Pia, I'm thinking about the work that you do on the intergenerational and intercultural front. Can you talk a little bit about these ecosystems of support for women of ages across the spectrum and supporting them in Swedish and English, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I want to hook on though the subject you talked about here.
Please.
That I actually took over as president for New York January 2020, and 2 months later.
Wow, what a time!
And let's say that I'm in the middle of my life. Not young, not old. So I had to learn quite quickly the digital platforms that was available. But actually, I must say, for Svea, it was really a positive change, because since we have 6,000 members on 5 continents, we have in 70 countries chapters. The whole world, Svea world, came closer, and I mean, we had to go from having a chapter for the purpose of meeting each other and networking real life to meet women from all over the world. And we have 3 core values. One is worldwide friendship, global competence, and local support. And all these words actually got another meaning because we could learn from each other online. And then we have the seniors, the younger ones. We learn about how to work on Zoom. We had webinars about everything that actually increased our common knowledge and our ability to enjoy what we could enjoy when we were locked in our homes working. And our organization is not only about working life, it's also because we have members that are actually the members that started Svea, they're now 80 plus, but they're still with us, and they still fill a very important role because the meeting between generations is so fruitful, and it makes life more rich for everyone. And that has been my purpose, to make everyone in our organization feel important. And if it means that the older ones have to have a little push to learn the technique, so be it, including myself. And I've had 3 annual meetings online, unmanaged. So yeah, I think it has been actually a positive impact that we had during COVID. And I'm still amazed about this organization I'm now part of, because it's blooming, and the next step for us now is to work on the Svea professional side. That's why I'm here today, to see the future and the young generation, because we have different needs and we are on different paths in life, walk of life, and it should be relevant for everyone.
Yeah, I know in my business we used to have a program of reverse mentorship, where the new interns that would be coming in would teach all the new cool tools, how to use Snapchat and Instagram filters and whatever it may be, to us older folks who really need the filters. And then the other way around, which was communication skills and really supporting one another of how to have adult business conversations with punctuation in the text and things like that. So just very quickly, I'm kind of curious, what are the tools that you found most helpful in creating these ecosystems? What are those? I think Zoom has become like the universal place for the meetup, right? We used to use meetup.com when we wanted to meet people in person, but Zoom has become the universal meeting hall. So what other tools have become really valuable to you in ecosystem building? Do you want to start us off, Pia?
Yeah, I'm thinking now. Yeah, I mean, that's the technical, of course, help.
Some of it, but
yeah. But I think what we have done is that we've probably broken down our activities to smaller groups during this period, because it wasn't really possible to meet in big crowds. So we have been able to meet outside and do things that has been COVID proof. But also we have created a lot of, I wouldn't call it subgroups, but we have something called Svea Care, we have Svea Professionals, Svea for Kids, Svea Art, Svea Writing. So we have created interest groups online, which are now, of course, when we can meet in real life, we will do live events. But it's just to gather women from different paths of lives and different ages that share an interest.
Yeah.
And so the main purpose, of course, is to meet and get to know people, because the main problem that Swedish women abroad meet is that they move, if they move a lot, this is a quick way to be integrated, to meet women who already live where you arrive, who can introduce you, who can, help you get integrated in your new home or a new place. And that, I think, has been the main focus during COVID. We also have another side of Svea where we give scholarships and donations to highlight Swedish language, culture and tradition. But I think the main focus has been on the social part during COVID, just to feel that you're not alone, trapped at home and feeling depressed. Yeah. You actually have people to share this situation with.
And I love this. It's what I heard you say, I think, is personalization, really finding the things that people have an affinity for, and then rapidly creating small communities that can grow around that personalization. Fantastic. Frances, what about you? What are the tools?
We used and have tested so many tools virtually in the pandemic. So obviously like the Zoom and the Google Meets, but we also tried a lot of other platforms like AirMeet, and there's like another one I can't remember the name of, but you end up going into a room and there's a bunch of different tables, and you go to the table and you can only see the faces of the people that are at the table. So it's really great and allows almost for like a simulated of an in-person experience of you are networking with a few people at your table. We run a lot of our like mentor kind of like speed datings on that sort of platform. So it allows for a lot of like very quick connection. There's a bunch of other platforms that will like automatically switch you, and so we really did see a boom in terms of like virtual options for connectivity in the pandemic as well. There's a company called Lunch Club that I think was started in New York. I signed up for that because I was like, I need connections with people, and they had pivoted to doing virtual coffees. So every week I'd sign up for 1 or 2 of those and just meet a new person because we didn't have the serendipity of events anymore. So really, and of course there's also the other tools like Slack where you're staying in communication, and WhatsApp and all of that, but those kinds of tools became more important than ever, and the experimentation that different companies had, and booms and success for a lot of those companies that previously were trying to do virtual events or conferences online, and then suddenly now they're like worth $1 billion as a company, but those tools were like critical, and we tested a lot of them.
Yeah, or Peloton, which was doing super great, and people were convening there in its own little ecosystem. Now, not so great.
Not so
yeah. Yeah. Hey, what did you find? Were there tools, especially citywide?
Well, it's interesting, the lunch club, right? I'm sure it's a lot easier to have a half-hour virtual coffee with somebody than go have lunch, right? And same with our digital office hours platform. I think there was a real boon in a lot of ways to the digital connection. We had an entrepreneurial boot camp for 50 plus women that we were planning to launch prior to the pandemic, because we did some research that determined that even though age discrimination is a real thing for women, especially for women in the workplace, all older entrepreneurs have higher success rates than the hooded 20-something of popular startup lore. And so we created programming specifically focused on women 50 plus, and it was a really great way for that group to convene, because these are people with kids. These are people who often have caregiving duties with their parents. And people could show up for 3 hours at home every night for their side hustle. I think that actually it was more successful than if we had to do it in, come to a place for twice a week for 3 hours, and it just kind of created a much more intimate group. They felt like they really knew each other because they weren't seeing each other in an artificial setting. They're meeting each other in their homes, and I think it's been a great opportunity for women, especially with kids with a lot of responsibilities, to connect in new ways. I'm eager for COVID to go away, but I hope that we keep this tool.
Yeah, and especially spreading ideas around innovation, right? That's why we're here today. Thinking about, Frances, you work with a lot of startups that are really bringing forth some very disruptive and innovative technologies from all over the world, still wanting to convene here in New York. Mm-hmm. What is that experience of pushing through a big idea in a brand new market, at a time when that face-to-face interaction isn't there? So that's step one of the question. And the other is money. Is venture capital funding for breakthrough ideas? What's that like now for women in innovation internationally coming to New York?
Yeah, so it was interesting because I remember when the pandemic happened, we were actually in the middle of a program. And all of our entrepreneurs were like, okay, we need to stop doing the program because we need people to focus on and figure out what's happening. And then we didn't know if companies were going to want to come to the US anymore, given what was happening in the world. And so we did 2 little test programs that were like a week-long boot camp each. And then we recruited for our first full-time virtual cohort. And it's really been interesting. There are a lot of benefits to it that I didn't necessarily expect at the time. So like when it comes to meeting with our mentor network, they actually have a lot more access now than they used to, because if previously investors or people that were in other areas of the United States weren't here, they couldn't meet with them. So our mentor network was much more available to the companies. Their pre-pandemic, it used to be really a requirement that the founder was actually here in order for them to actually do business and make a dent in anything. But since we're all meeting virtually anyway, it became much more of an opportunity for international entrepreneurs to do business in the US without having to have a presence here. Like pre-pandemic, we used to make the founders move here for 10 weeks. I cannot even imagine doing that anymore. And we're doing, primarily hybrid programs. The one thing that was hard to do with our cohorts, though, from a virtual perspective, was the community aspects between them. So previously, because when we run our flagship program, we have, 5 to 7 entrepreneurs from all over the world, different markets at the same time, different industries at the same time, and the amount that they would sort of collaborate with each other, create partnerships, open up networks in their home countries to each other, that was a little bit hard to create one-on-one, but the outcomes were still good virtually. Like our startups go on to raise additional venture capital. Our companies have gone on to get acquired even in the pandemic. They've gone on to close gigantic deals. We had a company from Austria that just closed a 7-figure deal, and they met the person entirely virtually through our program. So it really, there was a lot of benefits to that weren't necessarily there before. And I think the venture capital mindset has also changed for international startups, because previously, and there is still hesitancy. So when our investor network is we're like, here's our new cohort, they're like, how many of them are incorporated in the US? Is always like the first question. But they're more open to international innovation now, because the world kind of is more connected in a virtual sense. Previously, if an investor was going to take a board seat on a company that was international, the idea of them having to fly to wherever it is in the world to be in that board meeting, that's a big task if they don't have, if it's not one of those big global footprint funds. Where now they're much more open because they can take meetings, they can participate as a board member from anywhere and without having to travel. So the investment landscape has definitely opened up a lot for international startups, and there's, I think, a lot of benefits to the fact that they can do this work from anywhere and still access this market.
So, yes or no, do we think COVID has had an equalizing effect for women in innovation? What do you think is the net out of COVID? How has it really impacted women in innovation? Is it a thumbs up as a result, or is it a thumbs down? Have we seen, what's the negative side for women in innovation as a result of these last 2 years? Pia, what do you think?
I don't think negative. I only think positive.
You only think positive.
No, but I was just thinking here, since I have my little niche here in the crowd, I think what has happened for us is that, as I said before, our organization has shrunk, not in the sense of amount of members, but we have come closer, and we also developed Svea Professional, which has now developed a mentorship program on the international level, where you can online meet senior and junior, and we want to follow up on that here in New York, and because I think what you really need, of course, is this mentorship where you are active. So we are, with the help of other Swedish stakeholders, like the Swedish General Consulate, Swedish American Chamber of Commerce, and other actors, the Swedish businesses in New York, and other Nordic stakeholders too. I think it comes from this period that we have built, because we had been able to meet very easily all over the world and access each other's knowledge, experience. So I think it has kicked off something really special.
Yeah. What do you think, Faye? I'm thinking about women in innovation, and I immediately think of all the other responsibilities women have on their plates at the same time. What do you think as a result of these last 2 years? Where are we in these ecosystems?
Well, I would never want to overlook the extreme impact that the epidemic has had on already vulnerable communities. Think about the hospitality industry, the retail industry, think about small businesses, think about the childcare industry. A lot of industries that employ women of color have been hugely disrupted, and a lot of job losses have occurred. So I don't want to put a gloss on that. But if you're looking for a positive, I'm going to say that once the childcare, let's stick with that for a moment. There has been a real focus since the pandemic on our broken childcare system in America. It's always embarrassing to talk about this with people from Scandinavian countries because we're so far behind. But you're really left to fend for yourself in America. We don't have the supports that other countries do, and we don't have paid family leave, and we don't have universal child care. So what focus that this has put on those issues has invited not only government, state and local government, but also employers to want and to need to do things better, not as an economic development issue, right? If women can't participate fully in the workforce, that's an economic development issue. And to the extent that, and men too, I don't want to say childcare is only a women's issue, but a lot of the conversation is happening among women's groups and among women, and also another, I'd say, upside of this has been that there is a whole industry emerging, it's called the femtech sector, around innovating to make caregiving easier, more efficient, to help the caregiving industry improve its practices, to help employers engage more deeply in supporting the caregivers in their midst. And I think one of the things that we did see during the pandemic is there were women with kids on their lap in Zoom, and there were men with kids on their lap in Zoom. And seeing those men with kids on their lap in Zoom, I mean, our former president was one of them, was incredibly powerful. And I think that also contributed. Nobody could escape it, right? You couldn't buy your way out of Zoom, out of the child, you couldn't buy your way out of COVID exposure. So the top ranks of companies, the senior leadership, the men in senior leadership were confronting this in new ways. And I think, sad as it is, that was critical piece of reframing the conversation here. And I think that the conversation has changed, and I'm optimistic that we will see continued innovation and improvement in this area.
Yeah.
Both policy, both public and private sector.
Here for innovation in childcare, right, in this country, because that would certainly be an innovation we'd all love to see. It's curious also, this shifting. I remember, just curious, a show of hands, I got into the innovation space in 1999. Can I have a show of hands? How many people had a full-time job in 1999? Yeah? Fantastic. Just looking at, so for our podcast listeners at home, probably about 4 or 5 folks in the audience, so great. But I can still recall going to innovation events and really being the only woman in the room, and going to startup nights and things like that. It was rare. So here we are, 23 years later, and we're talking about ecosystems, specifically around women in innovation. So we have come quite a long way, right, to be engaged in these kinds of systems. But what do you think has been the greatest advance we've made thus far? Is it access to capital? Is it creating communities of other women who can help one another? What would be your takeaway in terms of what we've built over this time? Because there are female-founded unicorns, right? $1 billion valuation companies started by women. I was just seeing that one of my favorite companies, Slutty Vegan, right, just earned something like $100 million in funding. Like incredible numbers we're seeing in the funding space. So let's talk a little bit about progress. What do you think are the greatest milestones we've hit so far, or some of the progress that we've made? And Frances, maybe I'll start it off with you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot more progress we still need, but I mean, the fact that we're in a room full of women that are talking about these things, and that there are so many women now, or there's more women that are being funded, that there's more fund managers as well that are actually, you know, investing in companies. Because I think that that's one of the really important things. I think it needs to start from the top. The people that are giving the money, that needs to be where the diversity first starts to happen, because that's how, you know, networks are built, ecosystems, referrals. Like, your network is kind of a representation sometimes of your biases, and so having more women at the top will lead to more female-funded companies. There's more women in tech working in the actual workforce. So there's definitely been, I think, large strides there. Of course, there's always more to do, but it is really good to see. Like, even my company is entirely women. Like, that's very, you know, unusual. We're not very diverse in that regard, but I like to think I'm shifting the whole scale.
Yeah, Faye, what do you think? What are some of these milestones in ecosystem development?
I want to say one word, which is menopause.
Yay! Yay!
Right, menopause.
Yay.
I'm saying menopause, right? That was something nobody talked about 3 years ago. And it's a gold mine, this industry. And I started to talk about it when we launched our 50+ boot camp. And it was, people get embarrassed when you say it. It's a life phase that every woman goes through. Half of the population goes through menopause at some point. And it was completely unspoken until I'd say like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Even being over 50 was something you didn't talk about. There's so much shame and loathing around that, in our culture. I don't know if that's true of other countries. But recently, there's been so many startups. Stacey London, who's a well-known fashion television personality in America, she has a menopause startup. I see friends of mine, formerly from the media, are going into, supplements and medicines and beauty care and, other devices to ease the sort of hormonal disruptions in life. And that is an industry that could never have happened if women weren't doing all the things that Frances was talking about. I mean, to walk, 5 years ago, say, to walk into a venture capital fund and pitch a menopause product, I can't even imagine, but the growth of all of this activity and conversation and focus on directing more funding to female led startups is creating an environment where we can talk about menopause. We can acknowledge it, own that it exists, and people can make a lot of money trying to help women through this phase in life. So that's maybe a secondary benefit. I think the childcare innovation sector is another area where we're seeing this. I think femtech in general, there's a lot more, focus on health and reproductive care in general. There are more startups that are succeeding, aiming at helping companies. Like, one of the things you're seeing a lot more of is an employer benefits around fertility and around deeper levels of care than their health insurance provides around fertility and childbirth and so forth. All of these things are happening because of what Frances was talking about.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
So, I was sitting here thinking about my, I'm actually on special leave from my work in Brussels, where I deal with the recruitment of Swedes to the EU institutions. And, it's only 100 years, last year was 100 years since Sweden had introduced voting rights for women, so it's 100 years ago. And during my time in Brussels, I remember that the government had set a feminist foreign policy. So I was one of those ambassadors with my colleagues to try to influence from within the EU institutions. And I recall a conversation I had with an HR department about, the paternity leave. And they don't say, what's that? You know, when men are home with the kids. They didn't ever heard about the expression.
Never occurred to them. Yeah.
So, and I was also fighting, you know, because there are different rules about how long you could be home with your kid due to the statutes of the EU employees and so on. But I was fighting together with the men that were working in the institutions so they could have their rights. So it's, I mean, I think a lot of things have happened about equality, and I think Nordic people, we are ambassadors for that, to kind of live it and influence and be role models. And if you talk about Svea, I can say that our last scholar, Helene Lundström Merlin, who's an author, she lives here in New York. She writes in English. I make some advertisement now. But she got money she's written a book that is based on the history of 2 Swedish women during the end of 1800, just until Swedish women got voting rights. And it's about the journey, what they had to live through, these women. One woman had 11 kids with I don't know how many men, and she had to pretend that she was a widow all the time because every man promised to marry her, but they never did. So, I mean, I just want to say that 100 years is quite a short period of time, but a lot of things has happened. I think what we can do is to just live it, and it's a natural thing. It's how it should be, and we should be proud of it.
I say this as the daughter of a 94-year-old mom who's still in the gym 3 times a week. That's her takeaway from ecosystem building, is getting out, taking a walk, and meeting people you never met before. And sometimes in our businesses, it's our responsibility to kind of get out, whether it's Zoom or get out virtually. I think so many of us have used the outdoors even as a means of building ecosystems. But let's talk a little bit about one more step over, which is around intersectionality, is finding different ways for us to build ecosystems across race, class, culture, age. How are we building ecosystems that make innovation stronger when we bring that intersectionality, that diversity of ideas into our business ecosystems? And what's the best way to do that, or at least some tips on how to build intersectional ecosystems, not just with people that we know and like and look like us? I'll start with you if you don't mind, Faye.
Well, that's a great question, an important question, and not one that there's an easy answer for. That's one of the reasons we came up with our digital office hours platform. I think that it really, you're right, affinity is a real thing. People look for people like them. And I was reading a statistic that, a couple things. Yesterday I was reading some research on social capital, which is, really your networks and who you know. And the research bears out that people's social networks tend to be comprised of people like them. And across the board, white men social networks are white men, and black men's social networks are black men, with exceptions, of course. But I think that in terms of formalizing what a more diverse innovation ecosystem looks like is really about the pipeline, and it's about what are the inputs. I was looking at a chart this morning of the primary funnels of companies that are funded by venture capital. These are all major prestigious universities in America. Stanford, MIT, Harvard, Wharton, the list will shock nobody. So what we think about in New York City is, how do we get CUNY on that list? How do we get the Public City University of New York on the list of funnels for innovation? Because you cannot tell me that people who went to Stanford and MIT and Wharton are the best poised to solve problems like inequality, problems like the great income differentials that are plaguing our country. We need people we will not fully recover from this pandemic as a city or as a country until everybody is at the table on innovation. And everything that we do, whether we're looking at climate change, whether we're looking at life sciences, whether we're looking at tech, whether we're looking at any industry, is how do we make sure that the diverse folks, that BIPOC founders can participate fully in this industry? How do we make sure that diverse talent can thrive in this industry? Because it is not only better for New York and better for the talent and better for those founders, it is better for all of us, because the research has shown the solutions will be better.
That's right.
And so that is, to me, it's about where are we seeding innovation? Is it only at well-funded private universities, or are we really serious about seeding innovation at community colleges, in boot camps? A lot of boot camps attract a lot of people who can't invest in a full-time college degree. Are we seeding this at public universities? To me, that's the secret to a more diverse ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And I would add, even on a corporate level, is creating open innovation systems for employees who can participate, not just the innovation team who's walled off, right, in one corner of the company that's making super widgets that'll come out 10 years from now. Go ahead.
Can I throw one more point?
Sure.
There's this amazing organization called Breakthrough Tech, which is led by an incredible leader called Judy Spitz, and she said, why aren't there more women graduating from computer science, right? There seem to be more women in computer science, but as a proportion of computer science graduates, it's going down. Well, she looked and she saw that the introductory classes were designed to weed people out. They're designed to keep people out of the field and only graduate the top, computer scientists. Well, when you do that, you're limiting who can participate in the industry. And she's been advocating very successfully for a more inclusive approach that brings people into the field. We need more innovators, not fewer innovators. It's a crazy way to look at things. It's a crazy way to structure an industry. And also, you're right. It's are all of the innovators computer science graduates? No, I mean, we're looking at New York City. One of the reasons why we have such a thriving innovation ecosystem is we don't have one industry. We're not a tech town. We are a tech town. We're also a fashion town. We're a media town. We have manufacturing here. We're a finance town. We're a food town. We are a thriving innovation ecosystem because we have so many different inputs, not one.
Hear, hear. And I think we can learn also from the Nordic side of this equation about how to bring, especially when you're operating around the world, how to bring different groups together that might not have sat next to each other if they were in Stockholm, right? How does that international ecosystem of building with women across different races, genders, class, etc., how does that work?
Do you mean within our organization?
Yeah, or even a larger perspective across the Nordics as you see it.
Well, what crossed my mind now is what we've done since I took over in January 2020, because of everything that happens. Also, for instance, the murder of Floyd in Minneapolis, that also had effect all over America, and for us coming here not having the culture with us from birth, and to understand and to share the place we live and how to kind of face it and deal with it. So we introduced it on our agenda, on our board meetings, a point called diversity, which includes a lot. It includes to understand the place we live, and that we discover and learn every borough in New York and visit every place. And also within our organization, that we learn who are the members. I mean, as we said before, the seniors, the younger. Do we see everyone? Do we make events that suits everyone? Do we have crossover things that can enrich? Because I think when you're older, you have more knowledge and experience, but there are other things you can really learn, and it can inspire from the younger people. For instance, this idea to have a membership program came from a young master student who is doing security, cybersecurity, and she came to me, why don't we have a mentorship program? That's a very good idea, why don't we have that? So I think diversity is crucial, I think, to create innovation and create new ideas and to move forward and to be relevant. In the wider perspective, I think our organization is in a sort of new phase because it was founded by women who are now plus 80, and the future is of course also the younger generation, and how do we make a situation where everyone feels relevant and everyone can contribute, and you know, 1 plus 1 is 3. So yeah.
So I think creating that space is what you said, even allowing an opening for people to participate that maybe we just assumed everyone felt welcome, but now the key word in creating ecosystems is creating a sense of belonging, and whether or not people belong in these ecosystems and making people feel welcome. It's not just about diversity and equity and inclusion, but the new word is now belonging.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm just noticing we're just to the end of our panel, so I think, are we opening it up for questions for our panel as well? Nope. Okay then. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I will not hold you back 1 more minute from our lunch, but thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists today. It's an honor to talk about women in ecosystems of innovation here in New York and in the Nordics and around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.